You remember the cold first. Not the cold of winter, not the stone floor cold of early mornings, or the ridge wind that found the gaps in your settlement's eastern wall before the work bells rang. This was something without season, without weather, the cold of a system already in motion, indifferent to your presence, indifferent to your name, indifferent to the small human fact of you entirely. You did not know where you were being taken. You were not told. No one explained. That was not how it worked. You had been a person once, a name, a settlement, a father who repaired water filtration systems and came home with oil under his fingernails, a mother who kept a small shrine to the emperor behind the kitchen partition, not out of fear, or not only out of fear, but because she said the emperor watched, and watching was the only protection she had ever truly believed in. You had a corner of a room that was yours, a world small enough that you knew its edges, a life so specific, so textured, that it had the quality of something permanent. You carried all of this without knowing you were carrying it, the way all humans do, the way a structure carries its own weight, without awareness, without choice, as the simple condition of remaining upright. Then one morning, the sky above your settlement opened, not with fire, not with sound. It opened quietly, a drop craft descending through low cloud, its hull the color of deep ocean. An aquila worked in gold across its prow. It set down outside the settlement walls without ceremony, without announcement. The landing struts met the ground with the sound of something settling into a place it had always been designated to occupy, less an arrival than a conclusion already written. Men in robes emerged first, functionaries, moving with the unhurried precision of those who have performed a task so many times that performance and procedure have ceased to be distinct. They did not look around. They did not need to. Behind them came something else entirely, a figure in armor the color of a deep ocean trench, pulling light inward rather than returning it, as if brightness was something it processed and held, taller than any doorframe your settlement had ever raised, standing with the absolute stillness of something structural, not waiting, not watching, simply present, the way a fortification is present, immovable not by effort, but by function. It did not survey the square. The institution it represented had already assessed everything that mattered long before the craft had descended through your sky. The robed men spoke to the settlement elders in low tones. Whatever was said did not take long. You were 12, maybe 13, watching from the doorway of a manufactory across the square, close enough to see the exchange, too far to hear the words. You did not understand what was happening, but something in you recognized the shape of it, the way you recognize before you can form the thought that something has already been decided, that the conversation in front of you is not a negotiation, it is a notification. You were selected. You were not the only one. Others were gathered. From your settlement, from settlements nearby. 7, 8, perhaps more by the time the count was complete. Collected with the efficiency of a process that had been enacted on 10,000 worlds before this one, and had found no reason to slow its pace for this. No explanation was offered, no ceremony observed. The robed men moved with the quiet authority of those who have never been required to justify their presence and carry no expectation of being asked to begin now. You were 12 years old. You had no framework for what was happening, and so you watched, the craft lifted without drama, The ascent was smooth, mechanical, purposeful, the motion of something that has made this journey more times than your world has recorded years. You pressed your face to the viewport and watched your settlement reduce itself. The filtration tower first, the one your father had repaired twice in the last year, the one that kept the lower quarter from going dry through summer. Then the eastern wall, the market square, the rooftops you had known the shape of since before you had words for shapes. You watched these things become small, then distant, then abstract, then gone. The cloud cover drew closed beneath you the way a seam closes, steadily, without drama, without the possibility of reopening. And then there were only the stars, the hull of a ship waiting in orbit, the dark between. They fed you. They gave you water. They did not explain. There was nothing in their manner that suggested explanation was something owed to you, not out of cruelty, but out of proportion. They were operating at a magnitude you had no instrument to measure yet. A magnitude at which one child, from one settlement, on one catalogued world, was a known quantity, expected, already entered into the record, already in transit toward its designated function within a system so large it had no need to announce itself. You lay in the hold and listened to the ship. The engines did not sound like engines. At that scale, they had become something else, a pressure rather than a sound, a low, continuous weight in the center of your chest, in the bones of your sternum, in the place where breath originates. The air carried coolant, recycled atmosphere, and something older beneath both, mineral, sealed, like a chamber shut for decades, and opened only because something inside it was finally needed. You did not sleep. The other children from other settlements were around you. Some spoke, some did not. One boy from a hive-adjacent agri-world wept quietly for 3 days, and then simply stopped. Not because the grief had passed, because he had understood at some instinctive level that the weeping was not going to change anything, and he was the sort of person who, given that understanding, would stop. You respected him for it. You did not know his name yet. You would learn it later. It was Alias. The life behind you was already past. Not gone, not erased, simply past. The way a door is passed once it has closed. The way a distance accumulates behind you whether you attend to it or not. The ship moved with the certainty of something that had always known its heading. And somewhere in the long dark of the hold, without choosing to, without understanding yet what you were moving toward, you began to move with it. When the ship translated back into real space and the viewing ports were unsealed, the robed attendants led you to a long observation gallery. They let you look. Macraga. You had seen picked images of worlds, agri-worlds, hive cities, the occasional fortress world rendered in schematic for educational purposes. But Macraga was something your eyes took time to process. Not beautiful, not in the way you had been taught beauty. Monumental. The planet itself was a declaration, continents of pale stone and dark water, vast and ordered, shaped by 10,000 years of deliberate civilization into something that looked less like a planet and more like an argument. An argument that order was not weakness. That structure, held against entropy long enough, became its own form of permanence. And in orbit, the installations, docks of cold metal stretching further than your eyes could resolve, vessels that dwarfed the ship you were on, the way a cathedral dwarfs a candle, the geometry of deliberate power, arranged without ostentation, without excess, every element functional, every element load-bearing. The Ultramarines did not construct to impress, they constructed to endure. This was the first lesson, and it arrived before anyone had spoken a word of doctrine to you. You looked at McCragger and understood, without being told, what kind of institution had built it. Not one that valued spectacle, not one that wanted to be admired, one that wanted to last. They took you to the surface in smaller craft. The descent was rougher, more turbulent, as if the world itself had no interest in your comfort, only in beginning your education. When the clouds broke, the mountains were the first thing you saw clearly. Immense, pale, serrated, covered in the grey-blue light of a sun more distant than your home worlds. Not welcoming mountains, enduring mountains. The facility was built into the base of the range. It had been there, you would eventually come to understand, for longer than your homeworld had kept written records. Generations of neophytes had passed through its corridors, had woken in its chambers, trained until they bled, broken, and been rebuilt into something the architecture itself was designed to produce. The walls held that history, the way old stone holds heat, not obviously, not sentimentally, but persistently, in the texture of the thing. You were given a cell, functional, clean, a bunk, a storage unit, a single viewport that showed a strip of sky. You were given a uniform, plain, grey, the colour of a threshold, something not yet what it would become. You were given a schedule. The schedule was everything. This is something you would not understand for months, and then more deeply with each passing year. The schedule was not a management tool. It was the first doctrine, the first expression of the Codex Astartes, as applied to a human body not yet capable of receiving the full weight of what the Codex required. Every meal at the same time, every training period at the same time, every period of study, sleep, and physical assessment, fixed, repeating, immovable. Not because the chapter feared disorder, because order was the medium in which transformation occurred. You cannot make something durable from something that is always shifting. The schedule was the frame. The frame was the first teaching. You trained, you ate, you studied, you slept and woke and trained again. Your body, in those early months, was the primary battlefield, not an external one. You were not fighting enemies yet. You were fighting the limitations of what you had been born as. The human body, in its natural state, is a remarkable and resilient thing. It is also, compared to what you would become, roughly as durable as paper in rain. The conditioning was systematic and total, not punishing for its own sake, never cruel. The chapter had no interest in cruelty. It had interest in function. And function required the removal of everything that would compromise the foundation. You ran until distance became abstract. You climbed until your hands bled, healed, and bled again. You were taught to move in ways that contradicted everything your body had learned across 12 years of ordinary existence, to be still when instinct demanded movement, to move when stillness would have felt natural, to breathe against exhaustion, to think against pain. You were taught that pain was information, that the body's signals could be read rather than simply suffered, that the difference between the human relationship with pain, stop, withdraw, protect, and the Astartes' relationship with pain, assess, continue, adapt, was not a matter of toughness. It was a matter of understanding what pain was actually for. Alias was around you throughout this. He moved through the training with the same quality of patient attention he had applied to his grief on the ship, steadily, without drama, assessing each challenge before committing to engage it. He never spoke about where he came from. Neither did you. That was not what the schedule had space for. But you watched him and learned things the instructors had not explicitly taught. That the distance between endurance and technique was smaller than you thought. That the person who did not waste motion on panic was always more effective than the person who was simply stronger. There was a girl from a void-born family, someone who had grown up on vessels not unlike the ship that had carried you here, and who therefore required no adjustment to confined spaces, to recycled air, to the psychology of living inside a machine. She adapted to the physical conditioning faster than any of you. Not because she was exceptional, though she was, but because she had never developed the assumption that the world should accommodate her body. Her body had always been required to accommodate the world. You watched both of them. You watched all of them. Something in you was already learning to read people the way the chapter was teaching you to read terrain, as a set of facts arranged in space, carrying information about what was possible and what was not. The Codex Astartes. You had heard the name before you could read it. The instructors referenced it the way your mother had once referenced the Emperor, not as a distant authority, but as a presence. Something immediate and applicable. Something that structured the texture of daily life. By the time you were permitted to study it directly, you had already been living inside it for years without knowing. The schedule was the Codex. The training methodology was the Codex. The hierarchy of the facility, the allocation of resources, the way decisions were made at every level. All of it was the Codex, expressed at different resolutions. Robu Te, Gilliman wrote it in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, in the long aftermath of the worst thing that had ever happened to the Imperium. The moment when half the Space Marine legions turned against the Emperor. When the full scale of what humanity was capable of destroying in itself became legible to history. Gilliman's response was not despair. His response was the Codex. From outside, it looks like a book of rules. A military manual, one man's attempt to impose order on the infinite complexity of Space Marine warfare. This is not wrong, but it is incomplete. The Codex is an argument that the galaxy can be understood well enough to be navigated, that warfare can be conducted according to principle rather than only instinct, that an institution defined by reproducible method and disciplined structure will outlast any individual genius, and will succeed in situations where individual genius might brilliantly fail. Individual greatness is contingent. It ends when the individual ends. What the Codex builds does not end with individuals. It is a method, a culture, a set of transmissible principles that can survive the death of any practitioner and continue producing effective Astartes across centuries. The Codex is an act of humility performed by one of the most capable minds in human history. It says, "I may be gone." The chapter must not be. You found this beautiful, not aesthetically, structurally. The beauty of something designed to outlast the thing that designed it. The first surgery came after 14 months. They told you in advance, not extensively, not with the emotional preparation you might in another life have expected. But they told you what would be done, what it would accomplish, what the recovery would require. The tone was the same tone the instructors applied to everything. Precise, clear, without elevation. This was a technical matter. The chapter had performed it 10,000 times. You would receive the secondary heart. The biscopia, the organ that would begin the rewriting of your musculature, the first of many. You remember the surgical chamber, ceiling featureless and white, the air antiseptic and mineral, the chapter's apothecary, white armor trimmed in the deep blue of the 13th Legion, hands larger than your head, but moving with a steadiness that was almost architectural, explaining in that same flat, precise register what was about to occur. You were not afraid. You examined yourself for fear and found something else, a focused attention. The surgery lasted 11 hours. The recovery lasted 3 weeks. Your body renegotiating with itself. 2 cardiovascular systems learning to operate in tandem. Musculature beginning to respond to signals it had never received before. It was not painful in the way injury is painful. It was disorienting. The way that a familiar room becomes disorienting when someone has moved every piece of furniture 2 centimeters to the left. Everything almost as it had been, but not quite. And the not quite was getting louder. There were 12 implantations over the years that followed. The os modular, the rewriting of your skeletal structure. Months of dull total body ache as your bones thickened and changed. Your ribcage broadened. The geometry of your body shifted away from ordinary human proportion towards something else. You remember standing before the small mirror in your cell one morning, looking at your reflection and feeling a distance from it. Not alienation, not distress. A quiet, factual recognition. The thing in the mirror was no longer quite the thing that had boarded a drop craft above your settlement years before. The hemastomen, which altered your blood. The Laraman's organ, which made grievous wounds survivable. The catalepsian node, which rewired your relationship with sleep, allowing you to rest in stages, to maintain partial consciousness during what the unaugmented body requires as total darkness, and which, as a consequence, made you aware for the first time of how much of your previous life had been conducted in a kind of fog. The ordinary human mind is always partly asleep, always partly distracted, always spending some fraction of its capacity on the maintenance of comfort, emotional equilibrium, social legibility. The node did not eliminate these capacities. It made them visible, and things that are visible can be managed. The preomnor, the omophagia, the multi-lung, each one a deliberate addition to the human template, each one carried in the Primarch's gene seed, the biological legacy of Robuta Guilliman himself, refined and preserved across 10,000 years of succession. Every Ultramarine who had come before you had carried these same modifications. Every Ultramarine who would come after you would carry them still. This is a thing you eventually sit with, that you are not simply trained. You are, at the cellular level, made of something ancient and deliberate. The gene seed in your body connects you backward through an unbroken chain to the beginning of the Legion, to the Great Crusade, to the Primarch who stood beside the Emperor of Mankind and built Ultramar into the most stable realm in the galaxy. You are not a person who joined an institution. You are the latest expression of something that began before you were born, and will continue after you are gone. You are given your armor in stages, over years. The undersuit first, not impressive, but the foundation, the thing without which nothing else functions. Then the greaves, the gauntlets, the chest plate, the gorget and pauldrons, the backpack with its life support systems, the low mechanical breathing of it becoming, across weeks of wearing, simply the sound of your own presence. Each component is old, not worn, Astartes' armor is maintained to the standard of total function. But hold, your armor has been worn by others before you. It carries their service in the chapter's records. What campaigns, what engagements, what damage sustained and repaired across years you are not yet alive for. You are not issued equipment. You are enrolled in a lineage. The first time you wear the complete suit, you stand in the facility's courtyard in the grey Macragge morning and feel your body encounter the thing it has been built toward. The weight, 3/4 of a ton of ceramite and adamantine and precision engineering, is not a burden, is a completion. Every modification, every implantation, every year of conditioning was architecture. The armor is the final wall, the surface you were always being prepared to inhabit. You look at your gauntleted hand. You think of your father's hand. Oil under the fingernails. You think of it without grief, as a small, real thing, held in accurate proportion to everything else it exists alongside. You do not miss it. You carry it. There is a difference. The first deployment comes with almost no ceremony. That is characteristic. Ultramarines do not dramatize. The Codex has no architecture for theatre. You are briefed, thoroughly, precisely, with a complete tactical and strategic picture available at the time of briefing, because Guilliman's doctrine holds that the soldier who understands the objective thinks more effectively on the ground than the soldier who understands only his immediate orders. You board the transport. The transport lifts. The world is an agri-world at the outer edge of Ultramar's sphere. Self-sufficient, previously unmolested, now reporting Orc incursion from a war originating 2 systems distant. The briefing categorizes the Orc force as medium weight, not a mature war, not the world-ending accumulation of green violence that the largest incursions become. A significant and growing threat, requiring immediate surgical response. You know about Orcs from your studies, their biology, their psychology, their way of warfare, the antithesis of the Codex in every particular. Where the Codex is structured, Orcs are fractal. Where Ultramarines calculate, Orcs accumulate. They fight because fighting is what their biology is designed to do. A large enough concentration of Orcs generates a psychic field that reinforces their belief in the function of their own weapons. Their ramshackle machinery operates because they believe it operates. Their numbers grow because violence draws more Orcs, the way heat draws everything that requires heat. You know all of this. You know it the way you know the Codex, completely, in principle. The first time you are in actual combat with Orcs, you discover that knowing something completely in principle is the beginning of competence, not the end of it. They are loud. This is the first thing. A human force in combat has grammar, a structure you can pass even through the chaos. Orc combat noise is categorically different. It is the sound of things that experience violence as a form of flourishing, that have no concept of retreat, no internal category for recalculation. The sound of an Orc charge is not the sound of an army advancing. It is the sound of a natural event that has been given tools and pointed at something. Your squad holds a ridgeline above the settlement. The Orcs come not as a wave but as a mass. Green, enormous, armoured in salvage, bellowing in something that is more organised sound than language, carrying weapons that should not function and do, pouring across the field below with the complete commitment of something that has decided this is what is happening now, and is simply enacting it. Your senior brother says 2 words. 2 words, at precisely the moment specified in Codex doctrine for this engagement type, delivered with the evenness of someone reading an inventory. 2 words that translate the mass below into a set of executable tactical decisions. The squad executes them with the same total, patient commitment it brings to everything. You fire, you observe, you adjust, you fire again. The orcs do not retreat. They must be made too few to continue. This takes longer than the briefing model suggested, not through failure of planning, but because orc biology is genuinely extraordinary. A round that stops a human is simply information an orc processes and continues through. You learn this in real time. The codex notation and the actual experience collide and refine into something more accurate than either alone. After it is over, you stand in the field as the light fails. Not triumph, not relief, something closer to completion. The settlement behind you is intact. The people in it, fragile, ordinary, unaugmented people who farm this world and sustain this small piece of the Imperium's function, will wake tomorrow and continue. That is the objective. The objective is achieved. You clean your weapon in the failing light with the same attention you have given to every task since the first day of the schedule. It is sufficient. It has always been sufficient. It is in the middle years, somewhere between what you were and what you are becoming, that the shift in perception begins. It is gradual, like the adjustment of vision in changing light. You don't notice it happening, and then you notice that it has happened, and then you understand that it was always going to happen, that this was the direction the process was always pointing. You are given a period of supervised interaction with the civilian population of a settlement near the chapter facility. The chapter does not bring its neophytes to the threshold of transformation without first ensuring they understand what they are transforming away from. You walk through the settlement in plain clothes, enormous now, even without armor, your body already categorically different from the people around you. And you observe. The humans around you are ordinary. This is not a criticism. You had been ordinary. It is simply the accurate description of what they are. People moving through their days with the full weight of human needs and fears and hopes, protecting things that matter to them. Families, households, the particular certainties of a life scaled to a single world. They are fragile in ways that are now, to your augmented perception, precise and visible. The thinness of a wrist, the shallow chest of a child at a run, the way an elderly man distributes his weight against a body that has served him for 60 years and is beginning to fail that service. You do not feel superior. This is important to understand. The feeling is closer to what a physician experiences looking at a crowd, not contempt for those who don't know anatomy, but a precise and caring awareness of their vulnerability. They are human. They are the reason the Imperium exists. They are what the Ultramarines are made and remade and sent to war to preserve. They are what is being defended, but you are no longer one of them. This is not a loss, or rather, you wait for it to feel like a loss, because the human mind, even one being systematically refined, expects that leaving something requires grieving it, but the grief does not arrive. What arrives is something more like legibility. The distances between things become readable. You are here, they are there. The distance is not hostility, it is function. A bulwark stands apart from what it protects. That separation is precisely what makes it a bulwark. You walk back to the facility as the sun descends. You watch the settlement's lights come on, one by one, through the narrow windows of its buildings. And you think about the scale of the Imperium. 1,000,000 worlds, 1,000,000,000,000 lives. A galaxy that has been attempting to end humanity for 10,000 years and has not yet succeeded. And you understand, in a way that is no longer abstract but physical and real, that the equation cannot balance on an individual scale. Individual lives are what the Imperium is made of, but they are not the unit of calculation when the survival of the species is what is being measured. The chapter thinks in centuries. The Primarch returned now, a thing that should not have been possible and yet is, thinks in millennia. The Emperor on his golden throne has been doing something no one fully comprehends, but which has sustained the light of the Astronomicon for 10,000 years. These are not human timescales. You are being trained to think on these timescales. The fragility of individual humans at this scale is not a tragedy. It is a fact to be managed, a vulnerability to be defended, a responsibility to be carried by those who can carry it. Brotherhood arrives differently than you expected. You had anticipated something resembling the friendships of your childhood. Warmth, shared language, the informal closeness of people who have grown through the same years together. It does not feel like that. It feels load-bearing, structural. Alias, who is now as large as you are, and carries that patience of his like a weight distributed perfectly across his frame, is not a person you are fond of in the old sense. He is a person you would die for, without the millisecond of calculation that precedes every human act of genuine sacrifice. This is the distinction. Human courage has to overcome the instinct to survive. Astartes' brotherhood does not override that instinct. It redefines it. Your survival, at the deepest level of your understanding, is not separate from the survival of the squad. The squad is the unit. Your body is an instrument of the squad. If the squad endures and you do not, something has been preserved. If you endure and the squad does not, something has been lost that cannot be recovered. This is what the process has actually produced in you. A being for whom the collective is not a compromise of the self, but the completion of it. You are more fully what you are as a member of the squad than you could ever be alone. The Tyranids came later. Everything you know about orcs, however extreme, however biologically improbable, has a legible framework. They are living things, motivated by drives that are comprehensible in kind, if not in degree. Violence, accumulation, the biological imperative to fight. You can map this. The Codex has mapped it. You have a language for it, even when it is actively trying to end you. The Tyranids have no such legibility. This is not exaggeration. It is a precise description of what even the most disciplined Astartes mind encounters in contact with hive fleet organisms. Not something alien in the way orcs are alien, extreme but recognizable in structure, but something alien in category. The Tyranids are not a species in any sense the word is built to carry. They are a distributed system, a single organism of such scale that individual creatures are not individuals at all. They are cellular expressions of a directive so total it has no equivalent in the Imperium's philosophy, no equivalent in its theology, no equivalent anywhere, except in the oldest and most fundamental fact of biology, that hunger precedes everything else, and everything else is in service to it. They do not hate you. They do not fear you. They do not register you as opposition in any sense that makes opposition meaningful. You are biomass. You are component material. You are the thing the system is currently processing. The Codex was not written for this. It was written by a being of extraordinary foresight for the full range of threats that existed when the pen met the page. The Tyranids come from outside the galaxy, from a direction that was simply empty space when Guilliman wrote. And yet the Codex, applied with discipline and the willingness to adapt its principles without abandoning them, remains the most effective tool available. Because the principles hold even when the specific enemy is new. Concentration of force, controlled withdrawal, the preservation of strategic assets, targeted engagement over attritional exposure. The Codex does not tell you what the hive mind is. It tells you how to continue functioning despite not knowing. You are in a tunnel system beneath a hive settlement, Alias on your left, the Voidborn Marine on your right. The tunnel full of something the Codex designation calls gene stealers. Organisms that should not anatomically exist and that are testing every piece of individual courage and tactical knowledge you possess in ways that leave no processing capacity for anything except the immediate present. The squad survives. Not entirely. You lose one, the first loss among those who began this alongside you. And the loss is real in a way that your restructured emotional architecture processes not as grief, but as structural damage, a weight redistribution, something that changes the unit without collapsing it. You feel it. You are designed to feel it. The bond is real. Real bonds sustain real losses, but the mission continues. The settlement is evacuated. The tunnel system is sealed. You stand outside in the cold air and run the tactical assessment in the portion of your mind the catalepsian node keeps continuously operational, and you feel the scale of what the Imperium is facing, its full, enormous, absolute weight, and you feel it without despair. Despair is what happens when a person makes their individual contribution the unit of measurement. You have not thought in those terms for a long time. The relevant unit is whether the chapter endures, whether Ultramar holds, whether the human worlds in this system wake tomorrow with their populations intact and their capacity to function maintained. On that measurement, this engagement has succeeded. That is what gets filed. There is a moment, years later, when you are standing in the upper gallery of a facility on a world that is not Macragge, watching the sun descend over a city that has survived because the chapter arrived in time, and you think about the person you were when the dropcraft descended over your settlement, the 12-year-old in a manufactory doorway, watching something he had no framework for. You think about your father's hands, your mother's shrine, the corner of the room that was yours. You hold these things with the accuracy they deserve. They were real. They were the beginning of a person, the material from which the early stages of an identity were assembled. They are not erased. The catalepsian node ensures that very little is truly erased, that the record of experience is more complete in you than any unaugmented memory could preserve. But information is not identity. Identity is what is built on top of information, and what has been built on top of all your experience. The settlement, the cold hull, the surgical chamber, the first bolt gun discharge, the tunnel full of things that should not exist, is not the person who stood in that doorway watching a figure in blue armor stand still, the way a wall stands still. That person was the beginning. You are not a beginning. You are what came next. You are an ultramarine. You understand humanity the way the stars understand the worlds that orbit them, with full knowledge of the relationship, with the absolute clarity that distance permits, with no illusion that you are the same category of thing. You are not. You are what protects the thing. You are the edge of the thing. The part of humanity that agreed, at 12 years old, without full comprehension, but with something the chapter's selection process correctly identified as worth developing, agreed to become the part that stands between everything humanity is and everything that wants it to end. The sun goes down. The city's lights come on, one by one, the way lights come on everywhere. The way they came on in the settlement when you were 12 and walked back through the civilian quarter with the distance forming in you quietly. The shift beginning, the perception slowly recalibrating toward what it was always going to become. You watch the lights and feel the weight of your armor and feel the chapter around you. Not as presence in this room, but as reality. Alias, somewhere across the sector completing his own assessment. Your brothers in their various deployments. The chapter master on Macragge reviewing the strategic picture. The Primarch somewhere in the galaxy making decisions on timescales that make a single sunset look like a single heartbeat. You feel all of this as belonging, not human belonging. Something that replaced human belonging so gradually there was no moment of rupture. Only the slow revelation that what you had always been moving toward was not what you had left behind, but what you had become. The Imperium is vast. It is broken in ways no single institution can fully repair. It sustains itself on the faith and labor and sacrifice of 1 trillion ordinary lives. Each one small, each one irreplaceable, each one carrying the full weight of a human world inside a single brief body. The Codex is, at its deepest level, a document that says, treat the lives in your care as the most important thing, and treat your own life as the instrument by which you do so. You are the instrument. You will carry this for as long as you are capable. When you are no longer capable, your gene seed will be recovered and cultivated, and the chain will continue. The next Ultramarine who carries a trace of what you are will stand on a different world, watching different lights come on, and feel the same complete, functional, necessary peace. The galaxy does not care what you were. The galaxy only cares what you are, and you are ready for it. In the name of Robute, Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, Master of Ultramar, let none find us wanting.